It's good to be back, man.
Yeah, welcome back.
Sunny, bright and sunny, 70-degree New York.
Yeah.
I came back and I went to get my new iPhone, and it was like New York welcoming me with open arms, and I got caught in a rainstorm on the way to the Apple store.
Nice.
I was pretty happy to be back, though.
This is my favorite time of year, seriously, in New York. I mean, minus the rain.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing was earlier today it was really nice out because usually after the rain it's like pretty beautiful. So like this morning was pretty nice.
Yep.
Went to the Apple store at 5th Ave. They reopened it. Glass box on top. It's pretty awesome.
Nice.
If you're visiting New York, it's a good spot to go. Like this glass staircase, you just feel like Daddy Warbucks as you're walking downstairs about to drop $1,000 on an iPhone. It's pretty cool. So what you been working on?
I've been doing Ember Rails. The usual.
Who knew? The usual.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking, I was working on the side project and I was using it to like learn GraphQL, and I was using that Hasura to just automatically do it for me. And I was thinking it'd be fun to kind of write it myself. I was listening to the Bike Shed and they were talking about GraphQL, and I was just hearing some of the stuff that like, you know, the war stories from like their actual work. And I was like, I kind of want to get some of that experience. And then I was like, we could rewrite EmberMap's backend in GraphQL. We could just rewrite it.
Yeah.
And like, that would be kind of fun.
Yeah.
And like, it would actually be, I would actually want to work on it. I don't really want to work on it right now because like, it's kind of in a weird state.
Yeah. I'm just going to keep saying yeah.
It'd be really interesting to like use the GraphQL like library. They were talking about this data loader library that's like an official thing that's like has to do with like big gets that are like persisted or something and cacheable by GET request. They were talking about all sorts of cool stuff.
I think there's a trade-off here where like I am building a UI and I just want to spike on the UI, and Hasura, you know, from that whole episode
For sure.
is really good.
This would be more like learning to the goal would be to learn GraphQL. And I think like going forward, if we were going to start a new app, like I don't see why we wouldn't use GraphQL for something, even though we don't even know it that well, because
it's
the massive amount of momentum and tooling. Also, they said like ThoughtBot for all new projects are using GraphQL across the whole company, which was like, I was pretty stricken by that.
Awesome.
And they were like, what's the downsides, basically?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the project, and it's when I'm saying that, I'm not saying like, oh, we might use JSON API, we might use GraphQL. I think I'm in agreement with you. We would use GraphQL, but I think there is a trade-off of like, what do we use for GraphQL? Do we use a hosted service, or do we write?
Well, in this case, it would be
or
like
managed service, whatever you call it.
In this case, I think if we want to learn it and learn what it's like to implement it on this back end, it would be the GraphQL Ruby gem from GitHub. So that's like a pretty clear answer to me as far as Ruby goes and Rails. And then if we want to do Node or something like that, we could do that too, right? That would be different. But if like I was thinking like Hasura is really cool because I was just wanting to learn React. But if I wanted to learn, you know, GraphQL and just have a backend to hack on and see what it's like, how it compares to the normal APIs we build, like that would be a good exercise. And there's some really good paved cow paths there.
Yeah.
Like,
that's funny.
Again, I see ThoughtBot as like very reasonable, strong consultancy. People's opinions are really good. They're not like fanatics. When they said there's no downsides, they obviously weren't saying it's a perfect technology. They were just saying when it comes to making a backend for a front end, the BFF or whatever, which is what we're pretty interested in. But basically, the only thing we're interested in, we're not talking about general purpose APIs. They were like, it's very, very hard to make a case against GraphQL at this point.
Sure. I buy that. You know, I still want to push the like, what is it like to put business logic, like complex business logic, in a tool like Hasura? And
I'm super interested in that too. For sure.
You know why I feel this way? Because I think if we were to build a GraphQL backend in Ruby, I would learn a lot, but it would be the same exercise as building a
It would
JSON
feel like
API.
low value work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not low value. I mean, it would feel like
implementation
it's the same exercise as building a XML or JSON backend. It's where I want something I want something different.
Yeah,
I want to flex that muscle.
For sure. as far as like being as productive as possible, I agree. This was more like, just thinking about like, well, I mean, we have a backend right now for EmberMap, and we're running EmberMap, and yeah, it would be nice if it was. I think it would be nice if it was. It would be more pleasant to work on if it was GraphQL.
For sure.
You know, it would be a good learning ground for it. And but yeah, the Hasura thing is also super interesting.
Also, on the note of productivity, it's probably a lot easier to do business logic in Rails with a GraphQL gem than it is to do business logic in some managed third-party GraphQL server. So yes,
definitely.
In terms of being productive.
But if you can do it, though, you know, if you can do it, then it's good.
Yes.
If you can do it in the service, it's better. I was also thinking this because I was thinking about, you know, I want there to be really good examples of using Mirage with GraphQL. And I was like, I was listening to this conversation, I was like, it might be good for me to get my hands more dirty with it. Like, I have an app that's running right now that uses GraphQL, and I don't even remember like what I did. Like, it was like a flurry of work at like 3 a.m, and I had it all working, and it's like, it works, and I use that app like every week, and I don't even remember, like, there's just so much about the types, and so they were talking about, you know, all the things that you run into and what to know and good practices and stuff. And I was like, I don't even remember, like, I don't have enough context for this. So I was like, maybe it would be good for me to get more practice building the front end and the back end and understanding how they work and what the implementation's like. They were talking about it as, you know, they still love Rails and they still love Postgres and they still love domain modeling. And the way Chris talked about it in particular was like, now that he's used GraphQL, going back to the way they talk about REST makes me think that they do not use it the same way we have. So for years we've used includes with REST. And so he's talking about how with, a typical, you know, iOS app or SPA might need to make like 10 to 50 REST API requests just to get the data needed for a screen. And, you know, we don't build apps like that. We use inclusions and includes basically to get around that problem. And so we like to batch things up in a couple of requests. And so for us, that's not really an issue. He was talking about how like one of the arguments against GraphQL is like it can't be cached at using like HTTP GET, right? And he was like, well, that's actually important with REST because you're making like, let's say you're making 50 requests to paint a page. And to be fair, like there are actually lots of apps that do that. Like there are a lot of apps, if you actually look, there are a lot of requests just to paint a single page. He was like, the GET requests being cached there are more important because you're making all these things. But he's like, actually, that's never been an issue for us. Like when we have this one big query that's needed for this page, and that changes over time, but it's like one big query, we can just get it, and it's actually the caching is not as important. So my point being,
downsides of GraphQL.
Yeah.
They probably, and just you're talking about like GraphQL doesn't have caching. You can't stick something like varnish in front of it easily.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming that based off what you're saying. But
yeah, exactly.
For EmberMap, we definitely don't have that problem.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, we have caching, but we have caching because our API layer is so opaque that we need caching there. And this is where our bad experience comes from.
Yeah.
And so I think GraphQL would be a huge improvement over what's there today.
So the point I was getting back to was that he was talking about all this, and he was saying these are some of the downsides of like REST and stuff, but basically having done GraphQL and now having gone back to a REST app, working on an app with REST, he misses GraphQL. He actually sees GraphQL not as like a substitute for REST almost. He sees because it's not just an alternative transport protocol. It actually is like a layer on top of like Rails and the normal domain stuff and the database. So he doesn't see it in the same way. He says it actually affects, like, first of all, it affects like how it's very driven by the UI, which has always been about, unapologetically so, which I like and we like and they like too. So that's aligned. And again, like you could argue that as well about, you know, JSON API to some extent, but this is like truly like.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
So I think your phone is updated.
Oh yeah, I guess so. Is that the new phone?
Yeah.
Nice. Seems like they haven't improved Siri. So he basically feels like it affects how you build the front end because the front end developer is like thinking about the UI from the beginning, what data they need to paint to the screen. And then also he said something interesting, which was like, if you do end up with one big slow query, it's actually good in the sense that it gives you like a conversation point and you say like, oh, why is it slow? And it's like, oh, the reviews are slow and we don't need those on the initial paint, so we can defer those. And apparently GraphQL has like a way to like literally put defer in like a part of a query and like lazily look. I don't know how that affects the UI, like how that work, but like it streams it or something like that. Like pretty crazy. It sounded insane.
So you can write one query, but then like, you can break up
subgraph. You can say like defer, like not even changing your application code. I don't even know how it works.
So this is an area where the GraphQL support in Rails is so awesome because there's a way to just plug it in the action cable and have everything work. And so that's like that's the stuff that I get FOMO over.
For sure.
Also too, like it's always
another answer.
Okay,
go ahead.
No, because I'm gonna just ramble.
I was just gonna say a case of this. I just switched off of Ember CLI Tailwind to just like Tailwind and Post CSS, and then I switched to Visual Studio Code and added this thing, and it automatically knew my Tailwind JS because it was like I didn't have to do anything. If I had been using Ember CLI Tailwind, I'm not sure if that would have been true because we had that custom stuff. So there's just like another argument for like the sticking to the metal
happy path.
Yeah.
What everyone else is doing.
Like what everyone else is doing, exactly. So anyways, when he was talking about the REST API stuff, he was like, I feel like GraphQL is like, it's the BFF. It's you have the backend developers, they understand the modeling, they understand why the tables are the way they are, and you have someone building a front end, and now you have a dedicated place. Like this is literally a translation layer for going from the back end to the front end, and you're driven completely by the needs of the front end because that's the whole purpose of this thing. Now you could say the same thing about REST, but you're also making these arguments like, oh, it should be resourceful, it should be these right? I mean,
well, there's an interesting thing here is that the client, the front end developer gets to define what they want
exactly,
and then the back end developer just needs to support
implement it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Where with like even with JSON API, I mean, I guess JSON API is true to some extent, but like, we don't really use sparse fields.
Right.
There's not a sparse field happy path in Ember.
Right.
I mean, there's not. It's actually awful if you being a little dramatic here, but yeah, the experience isn't great.
Yeah. I think, by the way, the sparse thing, I'm still like, I don't actually care about that. I still think if we were building a GraphQL app, we would just do full fields because we want full representation for identity's sake. So I don't think we would care about that. It's more like, it's more about the other stuff. Everything is around like a backend for a front end. Everything, the whole experience, the API, the tooling for it, and then thinking about like having Mirage fit in that picture to me is important. And I think there's a really good story there because Mirage has always been about that. It's like front end driven development, right?
Yeah. Also, too, we talk a lot about like the vision of how these tools should work and what is like the higher level thing. I always point back to like Ember and routing. Like Ember and routing, its vision, its story is awesome.
Yeah.
And this is like a really good like story. There's a really good narrative, a really good vision.
Yeah.
Is I'm building a back end for the front end.
Yeah.
It's not about what is the best way to serve HTTP requests or the best way to cache. It's like what is the best tool?
How to avoid N+1 queries. Like that's like secondary.
Yeah.
Right.
How do I get data for the front end that I'm building? Yeah.
Right.
So that's really good. Like
that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's a good way to like resolve conflict.
Yes.
And when questions come up and
for sure. He said default GraphQL is basically like N+1 as a service.
Nice.
But then there's ways to solve that problem. So,
one thing I've noticed in all of the front ends I've worked on that when they start N+1ing, it's usually like I know the answer.
Yeah.
How to fix it.
Yeah.
It usually involves custom code in the back end, but I'm limited by the tooling where they try to be like generic and smart and infer things from, like an include statement in a JSON API string query, and then it starts N+1ing. It's weird. Yeah. Anyway, just ramble there. One thing I find difficult whenever we talk about JSON API, REST, and GraphQL is when folks say GraphQL is better than REST. The area of REST that they're coming from is massive. you don't know if they're coming from like just handcrafted endpoints and Rails that are all inconsistent versus something like a tool like JSON API that has includes.
Super constrained.
Yeah. And so it's always, I always find these conversations a little difficult to have. And I feel like people come from different places, and that changes how they talk about GraphQL.
Of course it does. But that's one of the, this kind of goes back to something that is kind of grinds my gears, or like, comes up in our conversations a lot, which is like this kind of difference between like talking in theory and then in practice. And Siri, I'm not talking to you. Like the whole iPad just lit up, and now she says I'm listening. That's super creepy. Does that mean she's upset at me? Can we do like, hey Siri, stop listening to me?
I can't do that.
Oh my goodness.
Right. I know you can't see this, but literally all 4 screens just lit up.
All right, I'm going to try to get back in my train of thought because I get easily distracted. Something that grinds my gears when we talk about this is people not differentiating or differentiating too much between theory and reality. We talk about REST sometimes in a theory vacuum because in our minds we have a notion of a well-defined domain model and a graph being transferred back and forth, and that is how we like to make APIs. It solves a lot of identity issues. You can ask questions like, have I already fetched video 1? And you can see if it's part of an existing query very easily when you follow these rules and work in a constrained way. So that is often how we think about it. But there's nothing about the tools, a lot of the tools that force you to do that. There's nothing about like talking to a startup and saying like, we need an API for this. Let's build like just a standard REST API. There's no constraints there. People are going to do what they're going to do.
Yep.
And people do lots of things. We've been pairing with lots of people. I've been pairing with lots of people with Mirage, and I see what their APIs are because Mirage is about re-implementing your API, and people are all over the place. And it's just completely besides the point and missing the fact that to say that they're not doing REST right or they should be using a different version of REST, because the reality is that's where they are with the tools that they have. And so
absolutely. Also too, you just don't like, we don't know, we weren't in the room when those decisions were made, and there's a million different trade-offs. And to say that you have to build it the REST way, it's completely ignoring 5,000 other important things.
Yeah, so it's super out of touch. It's not meeting people where they're at. Like the reasons that led to their decisions, whatever they are, like it's important for us to understand that that's what happened and how can we best meet their needs now. And telling them to eat their greens is not always the best. Sometimes it is, but it's not always the best thing. And so when GraphQL says like, never overfetch again, if people really do have an issue with overfetching because they're making like 50 requests just to get the data needed for the home screen, then that's going to be a real value proposition. Now for us, it's not, but there's other things that are interesting about GraphQL. But my point here is just that people, like you said, I don't know where people are coming from. They're coming from all different places, and that is true. Like people who are making greenfield apps aren't even having consistent APIs. And they might put collections under some different name of a key just because, or sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, or sometimes they name a resource different, even if it's like things that we would just say not even come across our minds. Like we have like a videos, we're making a UI and we have like a videos resource and we expose it at like /clips or something like that just because. And there's no reason to name it differently, or when you want to delete it, you call it something, just like stuff like that. That happens all the time. And so from that world, looking at GraphQL, you're actually introducing a lot of constraints and structure, because even if you're making things on your own, from us coming from a more constrained subset of REST to looking at GraphQL, we see a lack of convention, we see a lack of constraints, we see a lot of boilerplate. But maybe for a lot of people, I think like the type safety and some of the constraints around it, the query language is very constrained. Like it's a query language that has a definition, like it has a spec, like you can syntactically validate a query. Whereas In REST, you can just say, oh, question mark Q equal or whatever it is. You make it up. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So there are some more constraints there. Is it as constrained as we would like it? No. I mean, I want a freaking UI where I was watching you write a Rails table earlier today, and I was like, we shouldn't be typing in names of a Rails table. You should be like clicking and dragging a resource and saying it has many, and that's all you should be able to do. You should be able to name it anything and like add keys and all this low level stuff, right? But
I'll spend 2 months building a UI to generate the Rails migration that I wrote in 30 seconds today, just to make you happy.
Fair enough. But we would want to see it more constrained. If we used GraphQL, we would use it in a super constrained way, in the same way that we super constrain ourselves when we use REST. I think it's important to look at how people are really using your tool, and that's really the only thing that matters.
That's a really good point about the constraints, because one thing about, my experience working on JSON API apps is oftentimes you break these constraints and you break that REST pattern. Like, I need a batch update thing. And it's like, oh, I'm just going to, I'm going to make a one-off endpoint that's like not very RESTful. It might be called like /reorder, not RESTful at all. And it's going to take a bunch of, JSON API documents.
Right.
But still, it's like, it's very easy. Oh, it's just JSON. It's very easy for me to escape that. And yeah, probably every app I work on, I do have some things like that.
5 to 10% or something like that.
Yeah, where I break out of those things, and it does get unconstrained. So
yeah. And like a lot of times we have more time to work on things than a lot of developers do in like crazy situations. So like, we're trying to come up with the cleanest solutions we can in our situation. Imagine someone who's like, greener.
Hey man, I've been in those spots.
Yeah,
where
for sure.
You have to ship something that week.
For sure.
Also too, if you make the eat your greens argument when I have to ship something next week, I'm just not listening to you.
Yeah. So coming back to like Rails, because like we've always talked about how like, DHH, the way he talks about Rails is like, he said things like, if you're not going to take the time to learn how to use it well, like we don't care about you, in a sense. Like, we're making this for people who are going to invest the time to learn how to use it well. And I'm not going to, like be a parent to you. I'm not going to, that's not the right phrase. Like, I'm not going to put handcuffs on you. I'm not going to.
He said once, like it's not an easy bake oven.
Right. Exactly. That was like a blog post, right?
I think it was a talk.
Or a talk. Yeah.
Probably a blog post.
Exactly. So his point was, I'm like blanking right now. Not patronize. Is another word very close to patronize I can't think of. Anyways, he, there's a lot of rope to hang yourself with a tool like Rails, but they're going to explore the best ways to build like a constrained Rails app. And in theory, you could look at an app. DHH could look at an app and say like you're in the lines or you're out of the lines, right? You're being resourceful, all that kind of stuff. So I guess my question is also like, where I feel like there's two things in tension here, right?
Yeah.
On the one, it's like, if people are abusing REST, it's not their fault. It's REST's fault. And if GraphQL comes along and offers real solutions that meet them where they're at, and they're more successful with GraphQL, it's not because of hype. It's not because of marketing. It's not because it has a cool page. It's because it's solving real problems. Like that's my belief. Like that other stuff matters. It has an effect, but my belief is like the reason people started using JavaScript everywhere is not because whatever. It's because it's
just JavaScript.
It's because like there was aspects of the development, process before that were painful and annoying, and using JavaScript helped in a lot of ways. Like it helped people get their jobs done faster. It helped them do things that their users wanted, their managers wanted better. And so do new pain points come when you use a lot of JavaScript in apps? Of course. And so now there's new ways to solve that. But ultimately, like I think that's being driven by real pain points, real problems that people are having. And so same with like GraphQL and REST. And so I feel like that's the one aspect. And then the other aspect is like, but then if I believe that, why would I say like, oh, if someone's using Rails wrong, that's their own fault?
Well, I think so the tension here is REST is great. You can do a lot of great things with it, but you can also make a mess. GraphQL, nice and constrained. right? Is that where you're getting at?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, yes, sure.
And then also I can make the argument like, listen, I have to ship this thing next week. I just need to make a mess. Don't tell me how to do it correctly.
Or even like, maybe you could say in theory, REST is better if you learn how to use it right.
It's theory. Theory is the word.
In theory, REST is correct if you use it well, dear developer.
Yeah.
If you take the time to avail yourself of the principles of REST and identity, you will be more successful. You won't have the problems. Kind of the way we use REST, and we don't really have qualms with REST. Like we have issues with like tooling and resource and community, but it's not like at a theoretical level.
Right.
But like, you see what I'm saying? Why there's tension there?
I'm trying to think of like what the perfect tool for me is, and I think it's something that like lets me make a mess, that lets me cut corners when I'm on deadline, but it also
it feels wrong. It feels bad a little bit.
Of course, I know that I'm doing it, but it like puts that mess in a box. So I've kind of always felt this way about Rails. Like in Rails, I can have controllers that I can have views that are just messy and they do code that like should be in models or should be in controllers, but it's kind of in a box. It's not. It's just in that template. Maybe that template's a little slow or hard to refactor. So I like that. I want to be able to cut corners. Like the reality of being a programmer is you're just going to get way too much work on too short of a deadline, and you have to be able to make those trade-offs.
Right.
So yeah. And so maybe that's the thing with REST, where it's like you can cut corners, but it's hard to kind of reclaim that tech debt later on, because you can make a pretty big mess across your API. I don't know.
Well, there's also, I'm just trying, the kind of higher level thing here is just like, what technology do you recommend? Like, what technology do you think is good to choose? And there's a lot in that question. What technology are you going to use for new backends, right? Like, are you going to build new backends in GraphQL, let's say? Or, what are you going to use for your next project? And should you learn a thing? Like, is it popular is one thing, right? Does it address a pain point you've had in the past is one thing, right? How's the resourcing and tooling? All the stuff that we've talked about plenty of times. I think I'm just kind of exploring like, you see a lot of people on Twitter talking about certain aspects. You know, Evan was just talking from Vue about performance stuff with Vue, and performance comes up from time to time with technology. When Ryan Florence was first moving from Ember to React, he had a big talk about performance in Ember, and that can influence people. But like, what's actually important? You know what I mean?
Popularity is pretty good.
Yeah,
that was one thing. It's a really good proxy for, can solve a lot of problems. Good proxy for like time, right? Takes a long time for things to become popular.
Yeah, I think if you go down that path with a lot of people will say that things aren't always popular for the right reasons. And that comes back to like maybe another thing I'm kind of exploring, or just like a hypothesis I'm working on in my mind, which is like, is that true? Like, is Gatsby popular because it's...
What are the right reasons?
I'm just saying, you could say someone would say Gatsby's popular right now, but it's not. Actually, Chris and Brandon were talking about this on their podcast about Gatsby being popular, and it's like, is it needed? Is it solving a problem, right? You could say the same thing about React. You could say the same thing about Vue. You could say the same thing about GraphQL, right? You could say that about Mongo. I was thinking about this with Mongo too. Maybe this is why, because I like heard like 4 different things, and I kept thinking about this. I was like, we avoid Mongo because, you're kind of like influenced by like one of 2 corners of the programming universe, and like either you think in terms of like relational constraints, or you don't, or whatever, you didn't come from that background. And I was like listening to like a thing that had an ad for Mongo, and it was some huge app that uses Mongo, Webflow. It was the co-founder of Webflow, and it's all built on Mongo. And like Webflow is like an incredible piece of browser technology, incredible. It's like maybe there's nothing wrong with Mongo. Maybe we should just be using Mongo.
No, we can't. We can't. We've been making fun of Mongo for years. We can't.
I know it's true. People say that though. They're like, oh yeah, you want to use Mongo? You want to just
Listen.
lose all your data?
Listen,
Like,
we'll use DynamoDB. We just won't use Mongo. Document store is fine.
I think
just
we
not
should
Mongo.
rewrite EmberMap's backend in Node, Mongo, and GraphQL.
I mean, maybe if this was like 2015 and we were trying to raise millions of dollars, I'd say let's do it.
I don't know, man. Maybe it's important for us to try that, or with this small app. I think this stuff is it's funny because on the one hand I think it's not important, on the other hand I think it's really important. It's basically like, what do you recommend for technology?
Yeah.
It's like what and why.
I mean,
and there's so many people who make arguments that just make me want to like blow my brains out, because like it's like they're just talking about things that don't matter.
Yeah. Yes.
You know what I mean? It really drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
People, and I'm guilty of this, like why you would choose, Ember. Why would you choose X? And you make all sorts of arguments, and a lot of it is maybe the reality is like I like working with Ember, so like I've had an awesome time building Ember apps and being a part of the Ember community, and like that's actually the reason why, right? Which is totally valid, but it's also not what people say a lot of times, or people make.
Sure, that's fair. They over-index on like technical decisions and under-index on like personal preference.
Yeah.
When they're
ostensibly
when they're making the argument, but in the reality it's reversed. In the reality they're recommending because of personal preference and not really considering technical constraints. Now
that's true, but then going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's like, why did React light such a fire? Why did GraphQL take over? It's not, there's a reason. They're meeting a need, right? Obviously.
Yeah. I mean, that's do you need anything more than that?
Yeah.
You can just say they're solving a real pain point.
Yeah.
And they might not be perfect, but they're solving a real pain point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of like what like when Mongo was really popular, what the, massive updates are really hard.
I don't know anything about Mongo. And I've dismissed it in the past, like kind of, right? I don't actually have a strong opinion about it. But like I've never actually, there's no reason for me to have any opinion about it at all. Even Postgres versus MySQL, like I would use Postgres because of reasons, but like.
Oh, Postgres. I mean, Postgres versus MySQL, I don't think matters at all.
Yeah.
I think Postgres is better because it's easier to click a button on Heroku to get a Postgres database.
Yeah.
But I think there are actually technical trade-offs between Mongo and Postgres.
Sure, there are. I know there are. And I know there are different technologies for sure.
Also, too, I think a lot of what I've observed and probably have done is I think a lot of the dismissal of tools like Mongo comes from people doing something wrong in Postgres and saying, this is why I'm using Mongo, and having reasoning that has nothing to do with document store and having completely like relational data.
I know, but doesn't that go back to the same thing where people are using REST and GraphQL?
Yes, of course. It's like the answer there isn't to attack that person and to say Mongo's dumb. The answer there is to be like, how did Mongo like just completely get this person's attention?
Right.
And make them think that Mongo's going to solve their problems when
there's an easier solution.
A person looking at this knows that, exactly. There was an easier solution.
Which is to understand the tool or how to use it or something like that.
So how can we make the tool better? How can we make REST better?
Right.
So that folks that are running it, that are building these APIs don't feel like they need to run towards GraphQL.
Right. And maybe it doesn't even matter. Like GraphQL is fine. Like GraphQL is great. Like there's no reason to try to do that. But thinking about other things,
no, I think if you're all in on JSON API, which people in the Ember community are, I think there's a really good exercise to say why are folks using GraphQL and what could we do to make.
Yeah, you can't. That's true. Right. If you care about adoption for JSON API, for Ember, for anything that you're working on, and you think it's truly better, but people aren't winning with it, you need to think. You can't just stop and say, well, people who think like me are going to be successful with it, and I'm just going to try to get people to think like me. It's like you can't stop there, right? You have to do other things. you have to go beyond that. And whether it's make more libraries or more abstractions that nudge them there. Just like we've talked about, like how Rails helps you learn good database administration practices through things like auto-generating a primary key that's auto-incrementing, right? That's you pick that up. Like if I had to make a database on my own, there's a lot of things I would do right just because of the fact that I've used Rails.
Yeah, T timestamps.
Yeah,
perfect
exactly,
example.
exactly. It's pretty interesting, right? Yeah, the domain modeling stuff is crazy, man. I was in a gnarly debugging session last week with Ember Data and an API, and it gets crazy. And I feel like, there's a lot there, you know?
What do you like with Ember?
The reason I thought about it is because so this was kind of what was going on in my head is like the database, the good database constraints you get from like learning Rails. It's like, what can you get? How can we get people learning good like domain modeling and data fetching stuff over the network? Because that stuff is crazy. It gets so hard. Even people who know what they're doing, it can get hard, and like following those practices is just it's just hard. Like, but there's good ways to do it. You know, there are.
I mean, one of the things that's, first of all, this is the thing I struggle with the most. It's I can domain model things correctly, and then having a backend code that queries a database I can do that efficiently. And without even I can do that all in my ORM, right? It's very rare that I need to escape the ORM. But then as soon as I introduce the front end, it's really hard to get data, you know?
Yeah.
Even if I escape the ORM, the front end ORM, it's really hard to get data.
Yeah.
And so, just thinking of like what makes it easier. I think a lot of times it's like thinking like sending that domain model through to the front end and not hiding details from the front end. That's definitely one of the things.
For sure. Yeah. This is where I was thinking, this is where my thought process was going. And I was like, maybe we should rewrite or have a new app with a GraphQL backend and then just do things like see what the happy path is like in the front end, kind of get the experience that like Chris had from ThoughtBot. And like, maybe it's like no ORM. Maybe you do queries because queries and types actually replace a lot of the benefits of the ORM. And if you have something like, I think there's this library Urkel or URQL, and I think it has some notion of identity. If it knows that if there's a movie one in this part of this query and this part of this one, it can reuse it. And even if you're doing like sparse fields or whatever, and you query it, but you already have those fields in the cache, then it will resolve it. And basically, you just query what you need. And the caching layer is kind of like transparent to you. And there are relationships, but there's not, you're basically rendering from JSON. But like, because you're going through this GraphQL caching layer, you're effectively working with models. Like you don't run into the problems that people who rendered from JSON before GraphQL were hitting. If you just made an app and had a handcrafted API and you just query data and render from JSON, I feel like
I run into the identity problem very, very quickly.
Very quickly.
Okay, so you're saying if there's a transparent GraphQL cache that can resolve those things, it doesn't need to be like a perfect relationship identity map, but it's good enough.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it actually gets you like really, really close, and like you don't have to waste all this time with all this other stuff. And maybe that would be interesting to see that, you know?
Yeah. I feel like every time I step out of Ember Data and really Ember Data storefront, there's things about, you know, the identity map in Ember that I really like.
I know.
And I end up wanting to re-implement them, and I have the mental model re-implement them.
Yeah.
And I can do it.
I did it in the recipes app and the to-do app. I do it right away because you're fetching all the recipes and you click on one and you want it to be instant because you've already loaded it. And I'm like, I already know it. I already have it. But I think maybe if I was better with GraphQL stuff, maybe that would have happened already. And
you like know the tool.
You just get rid of that whole layer. Actually, you don't actually do like a use store find recipe one. You just do the query, and the query, because it's typed, can be shared across those two routes. And you just get rid of all that store stuff, all the replacing, all that stuff. You just get rid of it. I don't know.
Something is doing it though.
Yeah, the use query thing is
Okay.
basically. But you're thinking in terms of a query, you know, and because it's typed, it can match across. That's like the thing, right? That's why you can't match typically across API requests. If this guy is doing get post 1 and this guy's doing get posts, you don't know that you already have the data unless you have good constraints around.
Back to the good REST.
Yeah, good REST, exactly. Because there's identity and you know the payload is going to represent the same thing. And so if I say user.firstname, I'm going to be able to find user.firstname in both of those. That's the important part, right? But if you have types in it, like it's a GraphQL query, it might work. Anyways, it would be interesting to see. It would be interesting to see what it would look like. The other thing that's weird about all this is like GraphQL was literally created to help with the problem of overfetching. And so because that was the reason it was created for the Facebook news feed. And like, we do not have that problem. I don't think we have that problem. I mean, some of our pages are slow to load, I guess, because there's lots of includes, but like, but they're cached too. It's actually not.
No,
I don't think
we don't. We could
there's other
fetch
way lower hanging fruit.
Right. We could fetch way more data too.
Yeah. So, yeah, we don't have that problem.
I know you're saying GraphQL was created for overfetching, but
It seems to have become something else.
Yeah, exactly. Given that how successful people have been with GraphQL, I don't think it's about overfetching. I think there's a lot more going on there.
The types and the tooling.
The
tooling, what the types enable in forms of tooling. That has been, I think, a huge part of the reason people have adopted it.
You know, not to throw this all away, but part of this does feel like an implementation detail to me, where at the end of the day,
it all is, dude. It all is. Like you want to just a UI for like defining your relationships and then have it spit out a way to get your data and save your data. Like it all is.
Yeah.
You don't care.
I don't care.
For
and
sure.
if I went into a system that
For sure
didn't have these identity problems, to me, if it was GraphQL or JSON, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. The reason I care is because A, we're working on Mirage. B, teams today and for the next 2 decades are going to be writing their own APIs. And again, like I think I'm so thankful for the Ember community and the thought that folks like Yehuda and others have put into things like JSON API and identity maps with Ember data, because when I feel like as far as our understanding has gone over the last few years, like I just feel very, very confident talking about this stuff. And then I pair with people who are working on this and it feels like people have not moved forward in the last 5 or 6 years, basically.
Yep.
I've been programming since like 2012. And like I was starting to learn JavaScript and like make my own APIs and then like learn about Rails and conventions and resources and then now all this stuff with identity and how people are building iOS apps even and JavaScript apps. And I was like, I feel like I've learned a lot since those early days. And then you talk to a real company making a real API today and it's crazy. Like there's so much energy and time lost to that. And it feels like a huge problem to me. And it doesn't seem like the tooling is helping people get better at this. And I think that's why GraphQL is so important, because so many people have worked on teams and on apps with just inconsistent, artificially made APIs that are making everyone's lives harder for no real good reason. And even like GraphQL promising to address some of this stuff is huge, right? Because it's like, if you look at a lot of the marketing material from the REST community, like it's really bad in terms of addressing real pain points. It's not actually meeting people where they're at. Whereas you go to GraphQL and it's like, know exactly what data your API exposes. And it's like, wait, are you kidding me? And it's like, don't overfetch stuff. And it's like, wow, this sounds amazing. And it's like, never have a breaking change affect your, it's like, what? And it's like actually good. So I'm just saying, again, kind of like the theme of this whole conversation has kind of just been like technology adoption and like recommendation and like just how to get, and it's just like, this is still a huge problem. And there's nothing intrinsic about what's happening that is going to cause people to get better. Like it's not going to get better on its own. It's not. People are going to keep doing what they're going to do. And
it's a tech debt thing.
Yeah.
You can solve a problem quick and dirty with an API.
Yeah.
And so you're going to do that.
Yeah. people stop having SQL problems when they start using Rails and Laravel, but they're using those because they're giving them other benefits. It solves their SQL problems with their store procedures and their like artisanal, SQL statement interpolation languages and DSLs. Mm-hmm. But like Rails and Laravel have to give them enough to get them there, and then it solves that issue. So you backdoor.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. I mean, that's actually a great point, because I chose Rails for, like all the scaffolding and all that, but then being able to express my domain model, like actually writing out has many and belongs to, was so different from how I did things in PHP.
Yeah.
Just so different. Even though that was the same thing, it's just attacking the problem from a different angle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes my database tables much easier to understand.
They become an implementation detail instead of something you care about. And, you don't care about it anymore because it's taken care of for you, It's like Adam using Prettier. He doesn't care about his formatting anymore because the computer's going to do it for him. So that's like maybe that's the answer here, which is like, what is the tool that's going to let people not care about that? Hasura is one answer. If you can do everything you need to in your front end and then plug it into Hasura, you actually don't care about the transport layer is abstracted away from you completely. Just like with Webflow, Webflow generates a GraphQL, but you don't care because you don't even use that. You don't even code anything. You just define your resources, and then you drag you have an iterator, a repeater over an item collection, a podcast episode collection, and then it's doing it with GraphQL, but you don't care about that.
I wonder if something like the GraphQL Ruby gem is an example, something that just makes it super easy to query your Rails models,
right,
and expose them, and then all of a sudden you don't really care that it's in GraphQL. It's called the GraphQL Ruby gem, but you don't really care that it's in GraphQL. It's just, hey, look how easy it was to expose this data. Where with with JSON in Rails, like the happy path for exposing data is not.
You're thinking about so many things,
routes, controllers. You have JSON templates. Oh no, you have resources. You have there's a lot. Where with here's a GraphQL type, a GraphQL query, and it's exposed.
Yep.
Interesting.
And I think there's full stack developer types who are going to be like, oh yeah, you're just making all this work for yourself because you're choosing to use JavaScript and now you have two apps, and it's true. But again, there's a reason that team is doing that. There are certainly teams who are making decisions for the wrong reasons and choosing to make two apps and write a lot of JavaScript who don't need to do it. But there are plenty of teams who are not, who are doing it for real reasons. They want their teams to move faster and be able to move independent. They're pulling data from multiple places. All the reasons people will use the, whatever that thing was 6 months ago that's popular, micro front-end architecture, whatever. Basically SPAs, right? And so that's not going anywhere. It's not. And
we've all used an app that's we can tell there's a JavaScript app and it has a beautiful experience.
For sure. So given that it's only getting more popular, and you look at React and Vue on GitHub, and they have 150,000 stars, and it's crazy. They were just talking about having 100,000. It's a lot of people. You talk to people who are I talk to non-tech people who know what React is. So there's it's
we were at lunch today with two non-tech people, or on the edges of tech. They're like, oh, do you know React? And
yeah. So it's meeting a need. It's going to continue to be used. So the question is this data loading stuff and domain modeling stuff. It's you can learn all this stuff the way we've learned it over the past several years, and really see the problems before they're going to hit you and know how to preempt them. But and teaching is one way to do that, and education is one way to help people there. But it's also worth thinking about things that obviate the need to even understand it. And
sorry,
I thought I had you. I thought I had you, and then
I think sometimes we might put too much. We might overanalyze this stuff, where we're like, oh, Rails became popular because of X, Y, and Z. Where it might just be I made a lot of mistakes with PHP, and I learned a lot, and I saw Rails, and it kind of spoke to me, and I gave it a shot, and it was awesome. It might not have been some groundbreaking idea, that oh, this massive thing Rails solved. It might have just been it spoke to me. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going.
Wait, but hold on.
I made mistakes with PHP. I knew that
Then why did Vue get popular? Like, given that React, everyone is like,
I don't
tons
know,
of
but
people are happily building React applications.
I don't know. Like, that's the thing. I think we might be like overanalyzing. It's like, oh, Vue got popular because of templates and stuff. Like, we just don't know. Like, maybe people made mistakes with React, and then, you know, they could see a Vue app. They could see how it would have. Oh, okay. I can see how I could avoid certain mistakes with it. Okay, I'm going to give it a shot.
Yeah,
and it works well. I'm not saying that like, oh, it only got popular because of just chance. It's like no, it's like well thought through. It's good
well
design.
executed.
Well,
Yeah,
yes, well executed.
Yeah, Laravel, great example. Like, yeah, Docs, great.
My I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we don't know, and I wonder if we try to like back out reason for why something got popular.
I don't have a specific answer to the question why it got popular. However, I think the more interesting question is, do things get popular for the right reasons? Like, or is popularity something that can and should be ignored when teams are making tech decisions?
I mean,
obviously,
absolutely,
obviously not in the extreme, but like how much? I guess so. Like, how much should it matter?
I think it
matters a lot.
I think it matters a lot.
Okay.
I think popularity is a really good
so then
proxy
yeah.
for success.
So if you think it matters a lot and you believe what you just said, then the question is like, if you're interested, if you're doing work on open source tools like we do, then the question is like, what can you do to increase the chance of something becoming popular and therefore making people successful with it? That's an important question. And I
just want to yell at Ant. Go ahead.
To me, the answer is like, look, if you have to answer that by looking at the things that are popular and ask why they got that way. And I think you can explore that.
I think there are certain
and
trends.
I think like meeting real needs is like the biggest thing.
Yeah.
You know, again, like GraphQL. Yeah. Trends. Go ahead.
I think there's certain things we can look at popular projects, and we can see like, okay, they all have really good docs. They all have a good community. I was going to say they're all popular. Is that fair? Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I might be just like overanalyzing this and saying,
wait, but it's super important though. Like, it's super important that React came out and like ate the world. Like, that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think
it's important for teams. It's important for architecture. It's having a huge impact on how new companies are being built and tools are being built. How engineers are being taught. I mean, it's super important.
I think there's fundamentals here. It's like you have to provide value. You have to solve an actual problem. Your users have to understand why your users have to understand that they need this.
Yeah.
If you're telling your users, hey, you're making a mistake,
your
tech sucks, you're going to pay the price in 5 years.
Yeah.
No chance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
So I think there's those things, but I don't know. Those seem like,
that's good though. That's big.
Those seem like abstract fundamentals where if you told me like, okay,
why did Vue start getting?
Yeah. Go out and create the most popular JavaScript framework. I don't know that I could. I mean, I don't know that.
Yeah.
I don't have like a recipe for that. And it comes back to like, you have to provide value. You do.
But some people would disagree with you, by the way. Some people would say it's not, it's like, it's other reasons like marketing or something that's not necessarily about providing value.
I don't know. No, I mean, they might disagree with me, but I'm fine arguing against them because
I think I am too. Basically, that popularity is a good.
It's a good proxy for success. It's a good proxy for like for solving lots of different problems, right? Because very rarely do frameworks get popular just for building. Like React isn't popular just for building shopping sites. React is used in all different situations. That makes it popular. That tells me because React is popular, I know it was probably used to build lots of different apps, so it can probably build the apps that I'm working on. You know what I think so. I'm not doing like some backwards logic where I'm like talking myself into something.
I see what you're cooking over there.
This is like, how do we make a video go viral? Right?
Yeah, that's true. That's like basically impossible. Like no one has a formula for that.
Yeah, but we do know some fundamentals about viral videos.
That they're good.
They're good.
That they tend to be good.
That they're like short. They're I don't know. I know nothing about. Why did I bring this up? I know nothing about viral.
No, but it's
videos.
good. It's like, should you just watch? Should you just go to like the world's most popular movies list and watch that, regardless of anything else? Obviously not.
Wait, yes.
I mean, kind of.
Wait, yes.
No, but there's videos I like that. There's movies I like that are not the most popular. Like, what's the most popular movie? Is probably like Pikachu Detective or something like that. You know, if I just did what was most popular all the time, I'd be playing Pokemon Go. I'd be watching Game of Thrones, which I think was good, but I haven't watched it. But that's fine. What's like a really popular?
This life.
The Bachelor. Wait, I watched The Bachelor.
This life sounds so awful. I think if you sort by popularity and time, you will be making good decisions.
What about Taleb's Lindy
effect? Yeah. So this is time.
Oh, time.
Time is a predictor for success.
But most popular this year wouldn't be good. It'd be most popular last.
So if you were gonna say what are the best, I can only watch 100 movies.
Yeah.
I would say
look at the beginning of time.
Look at the beginning of time and sort by
popularity.
There's some function we could write that accounts for how old the movie is and how popular it is. Yeah. And so like movies that are made this year, you're probably not going to watch. Yeah, but a movie from like the 1930s that's popular.
Still, yeah, it's a good effect.
You're watching The Godfather.
Yeah. I think it's like Schindler's List, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But these are great.
Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I think it's good. Again, I'm not sure everyone would agree, but I think it's good. And also is like, what's popular from programming over the last 40 years and 30 years and 20 years, and I think you're going to get a lot of good answers. Again, going back to the talk about from Uncle Bob about functional and OOP and what you said a couple weeks ago about both of those being around for a long time and still they are popular.
Mm-hmm.
Not popular according to a 6-month poll on Twitter maybe, but popular according to usage in the real world over the last whatever, right?
Yep.
Super popular.
Yep. I also think, just to like argue against this, my argument against this is like there's technology that's new that is more risky, and so you might be able to get like an advantage because it's new.
Yeah.
But
you're the first one to watch Godfather or whatever when it came out, and you won in a sense because you watched what is going to end up being one of the top movies of all time before other people.
You didn't have to wait 60 years.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But there's a risk there.
Yeah.
So there's upside to be gained, but there's also like this might not work out.
Right.
I guarantee if you go watch all the movies that came out this year, 40 years from now, maybe one of them is.
Yeah. Interesting. I guess this is coming from like, where is it all coming from? It's like, people do have, I don't feel like I have a lot of like FOMO in general when it comes to not working with certain technologies. For me, it's more about like regret minimization, I guess, which is like, whether I'm recommending technology to somebody. Again, at the end of the day, I really don't actually care that much because like, we've been working, like Ember is pretty niche if you look at the universe of all like JavaScript frameworks. And we've had a great time building Ember apps, and we've been able to make, a living doing that for years. And like Tom and Yehuda have said this many times, like Ember's never been like number one. Like when it came out, Backbone was more popular than it, then Angular was more popular than it, then React was more popular than it, and now Vue is like really popular. But if you've been doing Ember development this whole time, like you've had a great time. Like I'm confident saying that. Teams might have had a hard time like hiring Ember developers because of popularity issues. But like, as far as like a technical recommendation, you're right up there with the rest of them, in my opinion. And personally, I've had like very fulfilling, satisfying time working with Ember over those years. But it's also just like thinking about like, it's just interesting, right? Like the GraphQL and REST stuff, and then all this other stuff is just kind of like people always want to be. You want to from a technical side, you want to do something that is the right choice is involved, because it's not only the technical stuff that you believe in, it is also this other stuff, which is like the popularity stuff side of it.
Is your question like more like, how do I know when to like actually seriously start to learn a technology
It's when my open source library demands it. That's the answer.
I was just going to tell you, you can go look at that, that whatever 4x4 grid that's like adopt.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thoughtworks.com or whatever it is.
Who knows?
No, I genuinely don't think it actually, like for someone building, it actually doesn't matter as much as people think. In some ways, and then in other ways, it does matter. That's like the most serious.
No.
And this goes back to. Go ahead.
There's definitely like there's a triangle, and it's like cost, quality, and time. Choose two. And this is kind of like this conversation. It's like I don't know. It's like popular. I don't know.
Yeah.
Lasts long.
Good technical foundations.
There's always like we can argue about one side, and there's always like another angle you can trump it from.
Yeah.
You can like attack it from. Like
that's true. Yeah, it was really interesting hearing about the Webflow thing with the MongoDB and like the Node API, because I feel like 5 years ago, someone doing that would run into all these problems. But now the folks working on that have the experience in the background that like all of us in the community have had, who have been building these kinds of apps for years, and like they're not making those mistakes. You know what I mean? It's very different. I got excited because I remember something we had written down to talk about, which was like related to all this, which was like objective advice with like design versus like, you know how Steve does these like design tips on Twitter where it's like, don't have shadows like directly behind each other, because in the real world, like that's not how shadows work. So you need to offset it from the source of light. And so that's like an objectively true thing. Like he can put a green check mark next to it and a red X next to the other one because it's wrong and right. And then like you try to think about doing that in software, and it's like, okay, on the one perspective, like the one extreme is like Sandy Metz's rules, like that, follow those. And it's like have methods that are, 5 lines or less. And so you show a long method and you put an X by it, and then you have a short one, you put a check mark. But we've all been in situations where that would be an awful piece of advice to take. Although for the majority of the time we would think it's a good thing, and that's the whole point of the rules, right? You like follow them until you know enough to know when to break them, kind of thing. But like it's hard though in software. It is hard. It's hard. It's much different than like in design maybe. And a lot of programming is building up the experience to know if you were going to say when to do this and when to do that. A lot of times it's knowing when to do it. When should I extract a class? When should I create a new file and split this up?
Yeah.
A lot of times my answer is like when it feels like you need to, like when it feels like it's a pain in the butt to keep working in what you're doing. And then now you have a bag of tricks to like change it. But it's like, that's harder to communicate. And so anyways, I just thought that was related to what we've been talking about, because pain points. And
do you think like the design green check mark red X comes from like the trade-offs there are easier to understand, where with like code, I feel like a lot of code, it's just like we can say what's good code and what's bad code, but we can never understand all the trade-offs that went into those decisions.
Yeah, even like this, David Korshad on Twitter always talks about state machines, but it's like I don't feel a need to use that in simple situations, so I'm not going to. It's like yeah, I think one of my like principles is like, we're gonna wrap up soon. I know it's just like rambling at this point.
No, this is great.
One of my principles is like, if something isn't painful, then don't change. Let your pain points kind of guide the changes that you make. I think that's really important.
Yeah,
I think that's like a good principle, because if you're not using an ORM, my hypothesis is that you will one day want that because of what you're going to run into, and it's a good solution for it. If you're aware of it, it's a good solution for it.
That pain points thing is really good too, because if something isn't causing pain and you do want to switch or you do want to change it, it forces you to say, well, why do I want to do it? Like, why?
Yes.
Because you have this framework for, does this cause pain? Yes or no? Okay, no. Why do I want to change it?
Yeah. And it's like, so this is like, even in Vue, you can only have single file components, right? And it's like sucks, because like then you're introducing pain. So if your thing introduces pain when you don't even have it yet, you're just like, oh, it's good to have single file components, because like people are going to write really long components. Yeah, but I'm not doing that right now, and you're making me do it. So it's like, that sucks, right? So it's like, you don't want your tool to do that. And it's like, again, going back to like the Mirage stuff and like the modeling and stuff like that. And if that's not how you think, we can sit here and argue all day why you should like, why it's good to like model everything and how it's going to help you. But what would be better, and what I've concluded from my pairing sessions, is that it's way better for the library to let you just do the low level thing and then have a smooth on ramp to a modeled system instead of starting out modeling everything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like the example of Mirage would be like, you have a users endpoint that returns users, like just this.get users respond with users. And like, oh, now you want to create a user. Okay, like just use a DB object and like DB users push some JSON and it's going to look like that. Oh, you need, okay, now you need, okay, I see you have like 5 route handlers that return, and this is actually what I saw, like collections under like a, it was like a route that was called, you know, resources or collector items or something like that. I can't remember. Let's just say it was items.
Categories.
Categories
is the one I always see. Every app has categories.
Users, categories, movies, categories, whatever. Every like collection endpoint had that. And it's like, oh, this is serializers. This is a serialization concern. And why would you care? Because like if that changes, or if you want to do different logic on the resource, like you want that serialization logic to be shared, and here's how you do it. But like there should be an easy way to ramp up to that, or it should at least be like evident that there's a way to do that. But that's not how, if you look at the guides for serializers and even like some of the APIs, it's not clear like that. But we can make it clear like that. We can make it like driven by the pain point. You know what I'm saying? When you get here, you're going to want to do this, you know?
Interesting, because I had this thought when you were talking that like, well, the good thing about what you're talking about is that all of these abstractions that you're eventually going to get to are built up from, they
Real
decompose. They decomposed.
Yes.
It's like actual, the Mirage code you write today.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is good. And but I'm saying like it's a good way for a library to work like that, right? And then you can say like, oh, I'm going to come in and learn Ember, and I want to like just write an Ember app the way Yehuda would write an Ember app. And so I want to learn how he would do it. I'm just going to like do what he tells me to do. And when like you're learning, that's really good to do that. And you're not necessarily experiencing the pain points. You're like, I'm just going to trust you. You know, I trust your technical expertise here and your decisions, and like that you've all run into these problems before. And so I'm just going to do this, like you say, I'm going to have one resource in my route or whatever, and use includes because of blah, 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 and make sure like my route blocks because of like, oh, I can get there from other ways and I didn't realize, whatever, right? And that's good too. But like, especially when it comes to like new technology, I think it's important to be driven from the pain, or else like you can't just take that for granted that people trust you like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You want them to be successul.
Wait, what do you mean by like, explain that people trust you like that?
It, like someone who already has built up trust, you know, when I was learning Rails, the people I knew and respected and tell me like follow the guides, and I'm just going to do what you tell me to do. Right. But like, if I tell someone to start using Mirage in their React app and they have a crazy API that's super inconsistent, and I sit there and tell them how to like model everything, oh, it really should be like this and consistent and all this stuff, here's why, it's like that's not going to be as good, because like first of all, they don't have like this huge trust reserve built up with me, and second of all, it's not even like I don't even know anything about their app, so like there could be all sorts of reasons I'm actually wrong, and maybe they've been burned before by people telling me you should do it like this, right? And oh, actually it turned out to be like pretty painful, so I'm doing things myself or whatever. So all that to say, what's the conclusion of all this?
I don't know.
Adoption is an interesting question. I think we both think popularity matters for good reasons. Things don't get popular for no reason. And they get popular for the right reasons. I think that might be my conclusion, is that when it comes to open source, things get popular for largely the right reasons, and therefore people should pay attention to popular things. I think that's true.
Okay. I would say
that's kind of like me just putting it out there. I haven't thought a lot about this, but just like
maybe not the original reasons, right? Like I can say that GraphQL was originally created for overfetching.
No, but that's different. No.
Right,
but saying why they got popular and why they say they're popular or why they say they're
not
created, no, not the same. Yeah. I'm not saying why things got popular. Like, what's the actual cause for it? But I'm just saying that cause, the actual cause is probably a good reason, and it means it addressed a real pain point and it's worth paying attention to.
I think a lot of us, we have all our identity tied up in these open source frameworks, and like, let's just step outside that. Like, let's go make a list of the books and movies and music you should listen to.
Yeah.
And I'll just crush you because I'm just going to do popular in time. And
yeah.
I don't want to, we already talked about this.
Yeah, that's interesting though. I do like the analogy. Yeah.
But yeah, step out of programming and think about it, for things that you don't have your identity tied to. And I think it's easier to make the argument there. So,
It's good. It's interesting. Cool. I think I'm going to be thinking about this for a little bit. This was an interesting conversation.
Nice.
Thank you for joining me today. My guest today has been Ryan Toronto from Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm going back this weekend, tomorrow.
Nice. You're going to visit family?
Visit family.
Is it going to be snowing there? My sister messaged my family and it was snowing in Minnesota. It was snowing. It was crazy. And I was in LA.
You're like, well, it's sunny and I'm on the beach. Have fun with that.
I was literally on the beach drinking beer, watching the Florida Gators lose to LSU. But it was sunshine out, so it made it a little bit better. Cool, man. Have fun in Boston.
Yep. All right. See you next week.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.